See, a lot of people assume the Memphis Grizzlies will have a small draft class, bring in a couple players and add some vets and run this thing back next season. But Zach Kleiman in the front office, they think a little differently. So what they did was bring in 5 rookies. The Grizzlies brought in 5 rookies. And we're going to talk about right now why those 5 rookies could potentially make or break this upcoming season. Let's get into it. The outlook on the 5 Grizzlies rookies right now coming up on Locked On Grizzlies.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Locked On Grizzlies. I am your host, Damichael Cole. We appreciate you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies each and every day. We appreciate you for making it one of your first listens, one of your first watches if you're tuning in on YouTube. And once again, we recently hit the 1,000 subs on YouTube about a couple weeks ago. We thank you for that, and the numbers are steadily rising. So keep putting the word out there that Locked On Grizzlies is your place to go to get the Grizzlies comments, to get the Grizzlies content that you need. We're going to keep chugging. It's the dog days of the year when it comes to the NBA, but we're going to keep churning out content. And there's always things going on in the news of the NBA cycle. The NBA never sleeps. And Locked On Grizzlies is where you come to get that access and information. And on top of that, we're everywhere. Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher. Wherever you want to go to get your podcast, you can put it in Google right now. How do I listen to a podcast? And wherever that place takes you to, Locked On Grizzlies is more than likely going to be there. So we appreciate you for tuning in and, just being loyal subscribers to the Locked On Grizzlies fan base. But again, I'm your host, Damichael Cole, beat writer for the Commercial Appeal here in Memphis, Tennessee. Just finished my first year on the beat, but I am a native Memphian as well. So I've been covering this team or been watching this team a very long time. And right now, this outlook going into next season is different than any Grizzlies season I have seen before. One reason it's different is because it's championship or bust. Yeah, during the grit and grind era, I think people wanted championships, but was it ever truly championship or bust? I don't think so. That team that went to the Western Conference Final is still renowned around the city of Memphis. And at the time, it was one of the greatest things we had seen. I grew up where, we saw the Grizzlies get swept and get swept and get swept until they finally broke that playoff, winless streak during the grit and grind era. So a lot has changed, all leading to this past season. Morant, Most Improved Player of the Year. Desmond Bane, one of the rising stars in the NBA, one of the top 3-point shooters. Jaren Jackson Jr., first team all defense. Steven Adams sets the Grizzlies offensive rebounding franchise record. Zaire Williams, a rookie that a lot of the fan base was skeptical on, actually breaks out, has a great season, and starts a lot of games. And from February on, shoots 36% from three-point range and proves he can be a part of this rotation. Brandon Clark, one of the best field goal percentage shooting seasons in franchise history. The list goes on. The team took the world by storm. And when you do that, it's nowhere to go but up. It's nowhere to go but up because right now, the Grizzlies were to stay here, whereas, number 2 seed, second round next season, people aren't going to be as excited. I think one way that people are very optimistic from after this past season is the Grizzlies lost to the eventual NBA champions. So there's no proof in the pudding that, they lost to a team that lost the next round and, got destroyed. Let's say, the Phoenix Suns, for example. Phoenix Suns were the number 1 seed. They lost to the Dallas Mavericks and got obliterated, as we saw in that game 7. And then what happened right after that? The Mavs got destroyed by the Golden State Warriors. But in the Grizzlies case, they lost to the team that won the NBA championship. And go look at the stats. The Grizzlies led that series for more minutes. So when they led that series for more minutes, the overall, I think, thought process going into the offseason, a lot of people just assumed, hey, the draft, the Grizzlies had 2 first-round picks. They'll probably get one player, trade the other pick, possibly get a veteran, and run this thing back, add a couple vet pieces. But no, it's not how the Grizzlies operate under Zach Kleiman. That's not how they've operated under Zach Kleiman. You shouldn't be surprised at what they did. What the Grizzlies did was add 4 draft picks, traded up twice, added 4 draft picks, and they went and got one of the best undrafted free agents out there in Kenneth Lofton Jr. So we've talked about these guys a lot. The 5 players, the rookies that we're talking about, is first-round picks Jake Laravia and David Roddy, second-round picks Kennedy Chandler and Vince Williams, and then your undrafted guy in Kenneth Lofton Jr. Grizzlies have been, Kenneth Lofton Jr. and Jake Laravia. So we'll start with those 2 guys when we're talking about the season outlooks, meaning their roles, because we don't have to touch too much on those. If you go look at previous episodes from the last week, you will see big, deep breakdowns on what Kenneth Lofton Jr. and Jake Laravia's roles could be coming up next season. But with Kenneth Lofton Jr., as we said from time to time, he's a guy right now in an interesting position. 2-way contract. He's on a 2-way deal. The Grizzlies can't play him. I believe that it's 50 games. He can't play more than 50 games. There are 82 games in the NBA regular season. And when you're on a 2-way deal, you're not eligible for the postseason. I think the preseason will be a big thing for him. We've seen a lot of times in the NBA, it actually happens a lot, where a guy signs a 2-way deal and gets boosted to a standard deal. The Miami Heat are one of the teams who actually do it a decent amount, I think. And, there are a couple other teams as well who have done it over the course of the past couple years since the 2-way deal has become a part of the NBA. Kenneth Lofton Jr. and Vince Williams are the 2 players on the 2-way deals. But in Kenneth Lofton Jr.'s case, he looks offensively ready right now. If you look at him, 6'7", 275 is what he's listed at. He told me he's 278, and he looks good. He feels good. He likes to play in weight. He's lost 20 pounds, according to himself. So with all that being said, the outlook for Kenneth Lofton is he has to find a way to get on the floor. And what does that look like? Well, right now there are minutes to be had, which we'll get to when we talk about this next player and a couple more players as well. There are minutes to be had in the front court with Jaren Jackson Jr. out. Jaren Jackson Jr. could be out to mid-December, could be out to Christmas, he'd be out past New Year's. All things that I've heard from his side and from the Grizzlies are that there's very little concern from perspective on Jaren Jackson Jr.'s injury, meaning when he comes back, he should be back. So with that being said, the Grizzlies just need someone to kind of be a placeholder. Kenneth Lofton Jr. is probably not going to get the opportunity to start as that placeholder, especially you talk about a guy who's right now in a position where he'd be limited to 50 games. But he's also in a position to make an impact because in the front court, you're looking at Santi Aldama, you're looking at Brandon Clark, Xavier Tillman, Steven Adams, Brandon Clark. I think I mentioned Brandon Clark already. But those are the guys that you're looking at as your impact guys in the front court. Back court, it's pretty loaded. You got some guys at small forward who can move down, possibly Dylan Brooks. We've talked about that before. Zaire Williams. Kyle Anderson isn't on this roster anymore. He was one of the more versatile weapons in the past, but he's not here anymore. That creates opportunity for Kenneth Lofton Jr. Personally, I think that he will get opportunities. He won't be just a 2-way player who's going to be sitting on the bench. The preseason will be his chance to show, okay, you showed what you can do against these guys. I think what we saw, actually, the one matchup that Kenneth Lofton Jr. struggled with was against the Kansas big man, the guy who was a senior at Kansas. I'm blanking on his name right now, but he played with the Timberwolves in Summer League, and I'm going to find his name. But the Kansas big man that played with the Timberwolves in Summer League, big guy, and he gave him trouble. Why did he give him trouble? Because one, he was 6'10", 6'11", and he was muscular. He was big, and from that perspective, I think Kenneth Lofton Jr. kind of met his match overall from a physicality standpoint. David McCormick, that's his name. David McCormick, the big man from the national championship Kansas Jayhawks. I believe he was with the Minnesota Timberwolves in Summer League, and you watch that matchup, Kenneth Lofton 6'7", he does a lot of his work below the rim and backing guys down. Couldn't back him down as much, and I think he struggled sometimes in that situation. Well, there are going to be a lot of David McCormicks in the NBA who probably are just as strong, maybe a little bit stronger, and move just as well. Those are the matchups that Lofton will struggle with. But we'll see how he, takes advantage of those other matchups, and I think he'll have those opportunities. The Grizzlies are talking about ways to cover him up on defense and things like that. But the opportunities will be there for him to succeed. Speaking of succeeding, one rookie that I mentioned that I think will succeed in his first year is Jake Laravia. So he's one of the guys that we're going to talk about next. And then there are going to be a couple guys I think you should take some chances on. And speaking of taking some chances, how about you go take some chances with Bet Online? Bet Online, the premier betting site for you to get all your bets. It's the #1 source, not only just for betting, but just sports information, right? You can go see the over and under in games and get an idea for which team is favored to beat another team, which team should win, which team is expected to win, run differentials, players expected from hits, go to the prop bets, player expected hits, pitchers expected runs allowed. All of that information is available to you on Bet Online. And I'm just talking baseball, right? Because right now we are in the heat of baseball season, but Bet Online is about to take it to another level very soon because the NFL season is right around the corner. Every team will be in training camp by tomorrow, by Thursday. Every NFL team will be in training camp. You know what that means? Preseason games are on the way, and Bet Online is going to have you covered there, as well as all these other sports. We're talking MMA, boxing. Everything's going on. Bet Online, that's your #1 premier source for your betting information. So just go to betonline.net. Go find what suits you. So a player I think that really suits the Grizzlies is Jake Laravia. And I've talked about this, like I said, we have a entire Locked On Grizzlies podcast dedicated to why I think he is a great fit. And I'll touch on it really quickly here because, he has a smooth shooting stroke. He spaces the floor and he gets to his spots. That didn't really work well for him in Summer League. Why? He kind of still shoots the ball a little bit too slow. That's nothing that you worry about. You look at some of the best shooters in the NBA right now. A lot of them came in the league in preseason or summer league or whatever it was, shooting the ball a little bit slow because all it is you're getting used to the game speed. You're not used to 6-7 guys closing out in a flash the way they are in the NBA. He'll adjust to that. That's why he hadn't gotten as many shots off. That's one of the reasons why he hadn't gotten as many shots off. But then he's going to be playing with Morant and Tyus Jones. Two guys, and one in Tyus Jones, who led the NBA in assist-to-turnover ratio for the 4th consecutive year. Then another guy in Morant, who just had one of the best paint scoring seasons we have ever seen from a guard, period. At least the last 25 years. So with that being said, if you got Morant going downhill, or you got Don Maestro, Tyus Jones kicking you the ball, it's money. It's money. Jake Laravia, he has a smooth shooting stroke. He's smart. He's intelligent. I've just sat down and talked with him just about, the adjustment to playing with Memphis. And one thing he told me is this is a perfect fit for him. The style, the up and down style, the multi-positional thing. But in terms of outlook, the thing about Jake Laravia is he's a 3-4 mix. You see he's listed as 6'7". You talk about a guy that's around 220 pounds. Well, I asked him, I said, hey, which position, we know the Grizzlies drafted you because of versatility. That's the theme of the Grizzlies offseason, right? We talked about this. Versatility, shooting, two of the biggest things that the Memphis Grizzlies emphasize. Well, you get both of those things with Jake Laravia, but with versatility, usually a guy is better at something. Think about baseball, for example. A switch hitter, bats from the left, bats from the right side. They usually have a favorable side, even if it's the slightest of margins. All the switch hitters, they have probably a better power hitting side, a better average hitting side. There's always some differences from that. But with that being said, when it comes to Jake Laravia, he prefers to be on the wing. According to that's where he's more comfortable. That's actually where he spent most of his time in summer league. And you talk about seasonal outlook. So the Grizzlies, one of the potential starting lineups that we've mentioned on here is moving Dillon Brooks to a small ball 4 role, a real small ball 4 role. What that would mean, Zaire Williams would be in the starting lineup. Who does that clear up minutes for at the 3 spot? None other than Jake Laravia. I think if you start Dillon Brooks, you have Jake Laravia as your starting 3 because John Conchar is more than likely going to be your 2 guard along with Tyus Jones as your point guard there. But Jake Laravia at the 3, I think that's his more comfortable position. I think if he succeeds to the maximum ability, that's where you need to play him. Yes, he's capable of playing the 4. He's played the 4. Matter of fact, he played the 4 a lot in college and had a heck of a season at Wake Forest. But he said he's more comfortable on the wing. I think if you want to ease a rookie into a situation, put him in the most comfortable spot. We've talked about from a lineup perspective with the Grizzlies, it may not hurt to go super small while Jaren Jackson Jr. is out. Move Dillon Brooks down to the small ball 4. We saw him hold his own against Karl-Anthony Towns, albeit it was in limited situations of the fourth quarter. But he held his own. Dillon Brooks is plenty strong. You get Zaire Williams into that starting lineup. So now you have experienced starters sprinkled all throughout. And you get Jake Laravia at the 3 spot where he is most comfortable. I think that's the best case for him as a seasonal outlook. If Zaire Williams is coming off the bench, that's the other option. That's where things get tricky because now you're battling for minutes at the 4 spot and you're behind Zaire Williams, who's going to play a lot at the 3, whether he starts or he comes off the bench. So Jake Laravia's season outlook, I think right now it depends on Zaire Williams. Zaire Williams starts, a lot of minutes for him to be had off the bench. If Zaire Williams is coming off the bench, it's hard for me to see Jake Laravia really cracking the rotation consistently. Of course, he'll get his chances. He'll have his hot streaks probably. He'll have his cold spells. But it's hard to see him cracking the rotation overall from that perspective. And then the next guy is David Roddy. That's the other first-round pick, 23rd pick. This is the guy you traded for DeAnthony Melton, the guy who averaged 10 points last year, a guy who was top 10 in the NBA in deflections. And, you know, streaky shooter. And I know a lot of the Locked On Grizzlies listeners, you've came and told me about, yeah, he doesn't produce in the playoffs. DeAnthony Melton we're talking about. Yes, all those things, you know, to some degree have been proven over the past couple seasons. But wasn't really sure about giving up on this guy. But David Roddy, one thing that he's shown so far is the energy, the hustle. It can't be matched. I have a story I wrote about a week ago on commercialappeal.com. Just you go check it out. I think it was very informative just about David Roddy, his upbringing, his background growing up with, I believe, 4 other brothers, him being the youngest, and straight up having to fight and claw for anything you wanted. That's how he plays on the court. No one's getting it if David Roddy can't get it. That's the way he plays, and that's how he's going to find himself in the rotation. I think right now, that backup 4 spot has his name written all over it. When you think of David Roddy, this is the best way I look at it. Think Kyle Anderson replacement. Not exactly the same player by a long shot. Very, very different. But at the same time, this is your guy who is capable of playing the 3, like Kyle Anderson. You'd rather have him at the 4, and he's capable of even going down to the 5. Like we saw, you know, Kyle Anderson guarded a 5 and Karl-Anthony Towns in the playoffs from time to time. David Roddy is a very positional, versatile guy, and I think with that backup 4 spot that we just talked about, Jake Laravia, you probably don't want to put him in that spot right now. He may grow into it, and over time, I think he'll be very seasoned to play that role. But David Roddy, same question was asked to him. Where are you more favorable right now? On the wing, in the post? He talked about playing a lot of his last season at Colorado State as the small ball 4. Also spent a lot of time at small ball 5, but didn't play a lot of the 3, which is where, you know, he spent some minutes in summer league, but he played a lot of minutes at the 4. That's his most comfortable spot. The 3 is Jake Laravia's most comfortable spot. Slot these guys into their most comfortable spots right now, and guess what? You may have Jake Laravia as your backup 3-man, and David Roddy as your backup 4. That seems like the best case scenario right now in Memphis. But seasonal outlook for David Roddy, I think, one, he's definitely going to have as much of an opportunity, even as Jake Laravia, to be very impactful on the roster. Again, these are guys that the Grizzlies need. These aren't wants. You don't just want David Roddy to produce this season. You need David Roddy to produce. You know why you need David Roddy to produce? Because I just mentioned Kyle Anderson. Kyle Anderson, the same Kyle Anderson who you saw have so many games with steals, so many games with blocks. The same Kyle Anderson when the Grizzlies couldn't do anything with DeMar DeRozan in the fourth quarter, and he walked up to Coach Taylor Jenkins in the huddle and said, "Let me get him," all to get a stop and rip the ball out of his hands on that possession to give the Grizzlies a win. That was Kyle Anderson. You need David Roddy to be productive because this was the Kyle Anderson that guarded LeBron James. You need Jake Laravia, in a way, to be productive because those DeAnthony Melton minutes, that 10 points per game, the streaky shooting, but when it was good, you saw in March, that was one of the best shooters in the league, period. So with that being said, the Grizzlies are in a very, very good situation, but they need those two guys, Jake Laravia and David Roddy, to produce. Now, we're going to talk about the 2 second-round picks, the two guys who you want to produce, but you may not need as much right away. Coming up right after the break. So the Grizzlies added 2 second-round picks. They first traded into the second round. Didn't think this guy was going to be available this late. The Grizzlies are actually, pretty surprised, pretty astonished at the fact that he was available, and that's Kenneth Chandler. This is a guy we're talking about the Grizzlies could have gotten in the first round. He was someone they liked at that point of the draft. But you know what? He fell to 38, fell right into the Grizzlies' hands, and now he's the third point guard. For a while, people wondered, is Kenneth Chandler going to be the second point guard? When Tyus Jones and the whole contract situation was getting figured out. But he's your number 3 guy, and he talked about it a lot. Towards the end of Summer League, he talked about the fact that, it's a great situation to be in. I actually did another story on this as well that you can check out at commercialappeal.com just about Kenneth Chandler and Ja Morant's relationship. But in it, I mentioned Tyus Jones too, because Kenneth Chandler said, he can't wait to learn from Ja Morant and Tyus. And he's in a great situation to do that. He's in a great situation. But when you think about seasonal outlook for Kenneth Chandler, it's a lot different for any of these guys. Here's the thing, because he's a point guard. At the end of the day, we seen Ja Morant play, 56 games this past season. Tyus Jones was pretty available throughout the season outside of, the COVID stretch and things like that, being in protocols. Tyus Jones was available. Now, when Morant was hurt, Ja Morant was hurt. Tyus Jones was your starting point guard. Desmond Bane became your de facto backup point guard. But Taylor Jenkins used to always say, even though Desmond Bane was the guy who was your de facto backup point guard, the Grizzlies had a by-committee approach. John Conchar or other guys, or just straight up be ball movement. One guy brings it up the floor, and now you just get into your offense and you're swinging the ball around, pick and rolls, and just trying to get some shots. That's one reason why it was hard for the Grizzlies to really just be a great half-court team. Well, you add Kenneth Chandler, he's going to have to grow. He's going to have to, learn the speed of the game. He talked about that adjustment, so far, in Summer League, just seeing how the game is faster and trying to, nail those things down. That's a big adjustment right now when you talk about for Kenneth Chandler. But he's in a situation where Tyus Jones or Ja Morant, go down for a week or miss 7-10 games or whatever it is. If they miss action, he becomes a vital part of this team's success. Not really right now. Tyus Jones and Ja Morant are probably going to take up most of the minutes. But if one of those guys, anything, he becomes a vital part of this team's success. Now you're talking about a backup rookie point guard, basically keeping the team afloat. And is Kenneth Chandler ready for that situation? Well, I think over the course of the season, we'll see him get better and better like you do out of most rookie point guards. There's an adjustment phase, the speed, just learning, how to play with your teammates. These are all guys he has to learn where shooters like the ball. Some guys like the wing. Some guys like to shoot at the top. Some guys like to shoot the corner. Some guys are cutters more than others, like Zaire Williams likes to cut a lot. Desmond Bane will cut depending on who has the ball. He cuts really hard. You just have to learn what guys like, and that's what's going to happen with Kenneth Chandler. And I think that overall is his seasonal outlook. You're talking about a guy who is one play away from being arguably the second or third most important player on the team. Just that quick. Just that quick. And it's a good thing he's in a good learning situation. Tyus Jones and Ja Morant aren't just one of the best point guard duos in the league. They're one of the smartest. We've talked about how guys have given Ja Morant his credit. Tyus Jones, the film work is sensational. You wonder why he's so good at the assist-to-turnover ratio. He does his work in the film room, and, he's gifted. He's gifted at taking care of the basketball as well. You combine those two guys, you get to watch some film with Ja Morant, get to watch some film with Tyus Jones, get to see what they see on the court, why they make the decisions they do. I think that'll help Kenneth Chandler. He'll benefit from that. The gift is already there. Talking about a guy with a 41-inch vertical. As we saw in Summer League, I think he is one of the most instinctive point guards in the draft class, period. He has some of the best hands, and he's going to have some of the best hands on the Grizzlies team this season, which is funny because if you ask me who had the best hands on the Grizzlies last season, and I've said this last season as well, for those who remember, De'Anthony Melton and Kyle Anderson were my two guys who I said had the best hands on the Grizzlies team. As a fact, Sean Coleman just did an episode on this recently, so go check that out as well, about how De'Anthony Melton and Kyle Anderson were a big part of the identity of the Grizzlies in terms of creating those turnovers. If you missed that episode, go check it out. Sean Coleman, my co-host, had you covered there on how the Grizzlies' identity could be a little bit different from that perspective. But Kenneth Chandler is a guy who brings that to the table. The shooting has to improve the overall efficiency. It wasn't there in Summer League. A lot of bad shots, but he's learning to play with these guys. It's usually how it is with point guards, and he'll be just fine. So the other second-round rookie was Vince Williams. Vince Williams is on a two-way deal right now. And if you look at Vince Williams' two-way contract, this is another guy who is actually in a pretty good situation. He'll have his time. He'll be able to take his time to learn under a lot of really good wings on this Grizzlies team. He's going to be behind Desmond Bane. He's going to be behind Zaire Williams. He's going to be behind Dillon Brooks. Dillon Brooks, as we saw, is a masterful teacher, if you didn't know that. He's one of the guys who is very good at constructive criticism. He lets guys know what they did wrong. He's not shy about challenging them to their faces and to the media. He will say things like, hey, we want Zaire Williams to slide his feet better, or we want this guy to get stronger, or this guy's doing good, but he's not doing great. Dillon Brooks is that type of teammate. He's going to bring that out of Vince Williams. And what I noticed about Vince Williams on the offensive end is kind of sort of the similarities to Jake Laravia we mentioned. He took shots, but he didn't take a lot of shots. He didn't take a lot of shots because, the flow of the offense didn't dictate him getting wide open shots, and those were the shots he wanted. Off the dribble, he didn't do much, like Jake Laravia. But I think with Jake Laravia being a first-round pick, he was put on a higher pedestal in that perspective. But Vince Williams actually went through some of the same things. But where they were different in Summer League, Vince Williams got it done on defense. This is a guy, I think it was the Timberwolves game too. The Grizzlies said, hey, we want you to get that matchup. That's the guy who scored the most points for the Timberwolves last game. That's your matchup. That's basically what they told him. And Vince Williams had a pretty good game that game. Vince Williams is someone who they're high on the defensive end. So you talk about 3-and-D. This is a 3-and-D potential type of player. So he's going to get a lot of time with the Memphis Hustle. He's going to get a lot of time with the Grizzlies as well. I think he's the one guy who you talk about is going to be bouncing back and forth. And at the end of the day, it's hard to see his two-way. There is a better pathway looking at Kenneth Lofton Jr.'s, seeing him being upgraded to a standard contract, whereas it's a little bit more murky when you look at the role of Vince Williams, especially after John Conchar's extension. And, all these guys, Zaire Williams, Dillon Brooks, Desmond Bane. This team is loaded on the wing. Jake Laravia is another one. And, there are going to be minutes to be had. But overall, Vince Williams, I think you talk about a shooter, talk about he's going to play defense. At the end of the day, the Grizzlies, at this point of their, you don't even call it a rebuild, but at this point of just the growth of this team, you're just putting the surrounding pieces around the building blocks. The building blocks are in place. You have John Morant. You have a franchise point guard. You have one of the best shooters in the NBA in Desmond Bane. You have one of the most dynamic defenders in Jaren Jackson Jr., who just made first-team all-defense. You have your veteran player who's vocal and smart and plays productive basketball in Steven Adams. You have a vocal leader, a player that the rest of the Grizzlies team often refers to as the heart and soul of the team, in Dillon Brooks, who actually guards wings and guards like he did Steph Curry in that Golden State series really well. You have a young rising guy in Zaire Williams. So tougher position for Vince Williams, but again, we'll see how he progresses. I think he'll have his time to really showcase what he brings to the table with the Memphis Hustle, but I wouldn't be surprised even if his hustle numbers aren't like Santi Aldama's hustle numbers, for example, when he was averaging 22 points per game. Might be a little different for Vince Williams, especially if he's playing a role that the Grizzlies want him to play, playing off of the ball, looking for spot-up opportunities, catching, pick and roll, dribble drive stuff, and, scoring really fast within the flow of the offense, not holding the ball much. That's what they want, and we'll see where Vince Williams progresses in those areas. But it's not just these guys. Those are the rookies. There's some second-year players. There's some third-year players. And there's just a lot of players on this Grizzlies team. When you talk about season outlook, they're going to be really important next season. Again, the Grizzlies, they haven't signed any outside free agents. They traded for a guy. They got a guy in Danny Green. But he's not going to be ready at the beginning of the season. He might not be ready for the majority or all of the season. Next episode, we're going to talk more about the season outlook, and we're going to talk about some more players. But thank you for making Locked On Grizzlies your first listen each and every day. Before you go, make sure your second listen is the Locked On NBA podcast. And I said, the Locked On NBA podcast, you want to know what's going on in the entire NBA? Locked On NBA podcast is where you go. Right here, we're going to have you covered. We're going to go in all in 30 minutes about the Grizzlies, but with the Locked On NBA podcast, you get 30 minutes at the entire league landscape. And guess what? A lot of that stuff usually impacts the Grizzlies. And right now it impacts the Grizzlies more than ever. You know why? Because you're talking about all those teams at the top of the Western Conference and the moves they're making. Those are the teams who are going to be the biggest challenges to the Grizzlies. You think the Grizzlies are a championship contender? You might want to pay attention to what those teams in the Eastern Conference are doing, because that's probably going to be one of their opponents if they make it that far. But Locked On NBA, that's where you go check it out. And it's everywhere, just like the Locked On Grizzlies podcast. Go check it out on Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you watch or listen to your podcast. Locked On NBA is there as well. But we appreciate you again. Thank you for tuning in to Locked On Grizzlies. Once again, I am your host, Damichael Cole, and we will see you next time.